Perfect. All right. I will talk a bit about my experience at the 10-day Vipassana meditation and specifically how it relates to, let's say, more of the left brain nerdy readings all the way from neuroscience to philosophy, psychology. And actually quite interesting because a lot of what you kind of learn and see within the Vipassana meditation itself maps quite closely to these elements. So, yes, you will experience these crazy floating in space, one with the universe type of sensations. But no, this is actually not what makes the Vipassana silent meditation retreat so special. The real impact on your life is actually so much more profound in all the good ways. And so before jumping into that, let's maybe do a quick recap of what Vipassana is for those of you that don't know. So Vipassana is actually one of the oldest meditation techniques in India. It's said to have originated with the Buddha about 2,500 years ago, who used it to achieve enlightenment. And the cool thing is, instead of just mere intellectual understanding, the entire practice is really focused on experiential and embodied wisdom. In other words, the truth is really what you feel yourself, what you experience, instead of what some dogma tells you. And this by nature makes the practice actually rational, which I'm a huge fan of, universal and non-secular, because it doesn't matter what the teachings or anything else tells you. The only thing you have to accept is really what you experience yourself. So in a way, you can actually look at it as a complement to your existing faith, if you have one, rather than a substitute. And let me try to explain the Vipassana meditation technique and its effects in step of increasing complexity, going from one word to a sentence to a short paragraph and then a longer overall overview. So if we start one word, equanimity, will become clear later on what that means. Short sentence, don't chase, embrace. Longer sentence, it's a tool for deep observations of the body and a framework for what to do with them. Short paragraph, it's applied wisdom in which you become able to discern the smallest sensation in your body. Moreover, you gain the ability to detect two specific categories of sensations that lead to misery. By observing them, instead of reacting to them for 100 hours during these 10 days of meditation, your brain actually undergoes some long-term changes. And then now, the longer version. So by training your attention, you become able to really laser focus it, and you discern the smallest sensation of vibration throughout your entire body. And as you do this, you will actually notice a rising and falling of sensations. You realize that nothing is really permanent, but rather nature and your body are governed by the law of impermanence. Contribution of the Buddha was that realization from those deep observation is that there's two categories of sensations that are the root of all, if not most, of our misery. And they're basically two sides of the same coin, which is our discontent with the present. These sensations are, on the one hand, aversion, and on the other hand, craving. Why those two specifically? Well, as you notice yourself that nothing is permanent, all these sensations are just coming and going, it doesn't make sense to act or give in to feelings of aversion. You want to go away from something, because literally if you just sit it out, that feeling will go away by itself. And similarly, craving, the problem with craving is actually twofold. You're not happy where you are, you want to have something else, something more. On the one hand, it might be that you actually never get to fulfill that craving, which just leads you to misery. Or even if you get it, also that feeling will also not be permanent and fade away, which then again leads to discontent. The proposed solution is actually relatively simple. It's instead of acting on both aversion and craving, you simply observe it and don't react to it. And in other words, you remain equanimous, which is literally the single yardstick to measure your progress in this meditation. So how exactly does this retreat help you to achieve those goals? So the cool thing is of this meditation, it artificially creates strong sensations of both aversion and craving. In a sense, it makes a perfect dojo for you to train your equanimity. So on the one hand, you will face excruciating pain by sitting in the same position for 1-2 hour sessions, 10 hours per day for 10 days straight. right? But the good thing is this pain that is not injuring you. It's just like very uncomfortable. But because you have this screaming sensation of aversion, by observing it and not acting on it, you basically strengthen your equanimity. On the other hand, as mentioned in the beginning, you will feel or get to these moments where your body seemingly dissolves and you're one with the universe, complete crazy stuff. The problem, you will crave that feeling more and more after you've experienced it once. But also here, the goal is to just remain equanimous. If that feeling comes, it comes. Cool. But you shouldn't try and crave it, because that in its sense is also an unpleasant feeling. The more you try to get it, actually, the less likely it is to come. And so now during these 10 days, over 100 hours, you keep training your equanimity without any distractions. And just by the length and intensity of it, you're actually slowly starting to change your brain, actually undergo neuroplasticity. So this means that the insights that you get are not just merely at the surface and intellectual in nature, but rather you start to change your unconscious autopilot. And so all of this is basically built on top of strong moral foundations, which can be summarized as wishing love and happiness to all. A little bit golden retriever energy, one might say. In the original words of the Buddha, those three tools that help you towards enlightenment and a life with little or no misery are called sila, morality, samadhi, which is more the observation, and panya, which is then the wisdom that you get through your own experience. To conclude, let's have another look at what Vipassana is and what it's not. This literally comes from their website itself. It's not a rite or ritual based on blind faith. It's neither intellectual nor philosophical entertainment, and it's not a holiday. Neither is it an escape from the trials and tribulations of everyday life. What is Vipassana? It's a technique that will reduce or get rid of your suffering. It's a method of mental purification, which allows you to face most life's tensions and problems in a calm and balanced way. It's an art of living that one can use to make a positive contribution to society. Alright, so now that we got that out of the way of what Vipassana is, why did it actually click so much for me? The funny thing is, during COVID, I started to read tons and tons of nonfiction books across all kinds of domains, all with amazing insights. However, it was all, say, surface level intellect. I lacked the tools to really integrate those sustainably into my life. And I actually decided to join the 10-day Vipassana silent meditation retreat primarily for the silent aspect. I thought to myself, finally, a moment where I can just sit, no distraction, and actually think about all these different insights that I gathered from these books. Fun fact, or turns out, not a lot of surface level thinking and reflecting happened during those 10 days. Instead, I actually realized that I was being handed the tools to actively integrate those insights into my life into a much, much deeper and profound level. And I can't tell you how excited I was after day one when that insight slowly started to sink in. But maybe it's easier to explain by means of an analogy. Imagine yourself in the past couple of years, you have read everything there is about how to be a good car driver. And so you kind of know in all kinds of different situations what the right course of action is. The problem is this is all surface level. You've never really driven a car. And I can guarantee you that even though you intellectually know what you need to do, the moment you actually sit in a car, your actions will not always be aligned, and especially not in stressy situations. And so what the 10-day Vipassana meditation retreat did is basically give me a car to drive and transcend those surface level insights at a much deeper level, ensuring that my actions will actually be aligned with all those insights that I've read about being a great driver. And as it happens, a lot of the surface level insights from all these nonfiction books mapped actually very closely to the empirical insights that I was gathering through the meditation practice itself. Basically here, now we come kind of to the gist of it, where I'll have some time markers and talk about how some of those different insights mapped to Vipassana itself. So let's start with the first one, neuroscience. In summary, the 10-day Vipassana meditation really taps into neuroplasticity, basically changing your brain. So by analogy, imagine your brain as a large box. This box gets all kinds of sensory stimuli in and then outputs other stimuli that are thoughts and actions. And so the question is now, how does this box convert these sensory stimuli into thoughts and actions? And so basically, you can imagine your brain when you're born as a savanna of tall, untouched grass. And as you start as a baby exploring the world and crawling through this mental savanna, you start to bend down the grass. And the more you crawl a specific path, the more and more that grass gets bent down, and actually light walking trails start to form. And so in neuroscience, we have a saying to kind of remember this neuroplasticity. Neurons that fire together, wire together. Neurons that fire out of sync lose their link. It's basically the more and more you repeat a specific thought pattern or specific actions, the more and more they kind of become ingrained in your autopilot. So the same that happens with muscle memory by just doing the same thing over and over again also works with thoughts. And so when you now have sensory stimuli coming into your brain, it tends to take the path of least resistance, similar to electricity. And to stay with the analogy, so those stimuli will tend to take the most paved roads in your mental jungle. And so as you grow older, the vegetation also morphs from savanna grass into a thicker jungle, which makes it harder to forge new paths. And so consequently, you will keep walking your existing paths more and more and more, which will make them deeper and deeper and kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So knowing this, Vipassana gives you two tools and a framework to actually change the layout of your mental jungle for the better. So it gives you a torch to observe sensations deep in the body, and it also trains you to be equanimous and not instinctively react to them. Secondly, it gives you a framework to know which parts of your body or mind lead to misery. So putting all of this together, in those 100 hours of meditation spread across 10 days, you're sitting in a dojo where on the one hand, you stop walking the paths that bring you misery, you give vegetation time to slowly reclaim those paths, and on the other hand, you start slashing laboriously new paths in your thick jungle that actually lead to a more peaceful mind. So I, as well as many others on the course, actually physically and mentally felt the benefits. Quite profound actually, but it is something you have to experience yourself. It's basically do the work, change the layout of your jungle. Don't just be aware what needs to be done at the surface level, because that definitely used to be my mistake. Number 2, Freud's ego and superego. Freud basically split the psyche into 3 parts: the unconscious superego, and it, you can then see them respectively as the little angel on your shoulder, the superego, and the little devil on your shoulder, the id. And then you have the ego, which is basically has a tough job of balancing these poles back and forth, as well as dealing with reality. And so the way I look at the Vipassana practice is one where you make the ego, as Freud has put it, and not our current mainstream meaning of the term, stronger, as to ignore the cries of the id, the little devil. And so over time, your id becomes smaller and weaker, and you become more aligned with your superego. Number 3, David Hume versus Plato, 2 philosophers. So Plato was all about reason and how our mind is basically in full control. But as you start developing your inner observation capabilities, you start to notice that the 18th century philosopher David Hume was actually much closer to the truth. We are reactive by default, but we are very good at tricking others as well as ourselves via cognitive dissonance, that our reactions came first and the feelings to justify it later. So to quote David Hume, reason is and ought only to be the slave of the passions and can never pretend to hold any other office than to serve and obey them. 4, shine light, don't fight or hide. This is also one of my core mantras. Sunlight destroys most bacteria, and similarly the best way to combat negativity in the mind or elsewhere is to bring it out into the light, put awareness onto it. And this is also at the core of Vipassana. Most of the time, if we feel bad or have a sensation of shame or whatnot, we try to hide it away, push it somewhere away. But as Vipassana also says, instead of doing that, put your core focus on it, and then it slowly starts to dissolve by itself. Number 5 is insights by plunging into the abyss. Broke Zarathustra and Ecce Homo. Nietzsche described the ultimate truth he found by plunging into the deepest depth of the abyss, which is eternal recurrence, which consequently enforced his view of Amar Fati, which is also very aligned with Vipassana's art of living. My formula for greatness in human being is Amar Fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity, not merely bear what is necessary, still less conceal it, but love it. Number 6, the rider and elephant analogy by Jonathan Haidt. So Jonathan basically explained how the brain can be seen as a large elephant and a small rider on top of it. Pretty similar to Daniel Kahneman's level 1 and level 2 thinking, for those of you that are familiar. And so basically in the previous analogy, right, where you have sensory stimuli coming into the box, the mental savannah or jungle, and then thoughts and actions, basically before you get the stimuli into a thought, or this basically zaps, let's say, your elephant, and your elephant tends to sprint off and immediately turn this into a thought or action. And so you have a rider on top of this elephant, but this rider has very little control to change the direction or even stop the elephant from charging off in the first place. And so the toolbox that you get through Vipassana meditation allows you to, 1, observe the stimuli actually before it even zaps the elephant, and number 2, train the rider to actually be much stronger and have much more influence over the elephant. And then both can be used to avoid toxic reactive behavior by the elephant and cultivate positive ones. Number 7, Alan Watts' backwards law, also pretty aligned with the core of Vipassana. To quote him, the more you try and grab hold of something, the more it slips through your fingers. So in other words, chasing a positive experience is inherently a negative one, and accepting a negative experience is in essence a positive one. Number 8, another Sigmund Freud, namely in his book Civilisations and Discontents, he argues how our behavior is largely dominated by what he calls the pleasure principle. It's the idea that we move towards perceived pleasure and away from perceived pain. And so Vipassana meditation aims to put a stop at this. To quote him, happiness is only an episodic phenomena. It comes from a state of contrast rather than a prolonged feeling which will turn into mild contentment. So in other words, it's better to cultivate prolonged feelings of gratitude and equanimity rather than the pursuit of our default rat race to the bottomless pit we call happiness. 9, Stoicism. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. So similar to this paint or this picture, you can see pain as the sphere. The problem is we have a tendency to amplify this by spinning all kinds of stories, etc. around the pain that we feel, and are really turn it into suffering. But like at its core, it really is just like this small compact sphere. Number 10, Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. Basically, we should step away from the binary framework of assigning sensations as either good or bad. We should just observe them for what they are, a sensation. Through the ages, especially in the West, with heavy influence from Christianity, it has become deeply, deeply ingrained in us to look at the world specifically through these binary tinted glasses. Vipassana actually allows you to take those glasses off and lift the veil. 11, Kant's categorical imperative. So Kant's reason-based moral compass is actually also largely aligned with the morality aspect of Vipassana. To quote Kant famously, act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, never merely as a means to an end, but always at the same time as an end. So just don't use people to achieve some other goal. Treat every person as an end in itself. Number 12, Spinoza. So much more to tell about Spinoza and Vipassana, but in short, every action in reality, if you truly look at it, is a reaction to something else. So, and this is also what you experience through Vipassana. And as Spinoza said, the real God is nature. And we should live in accordance to the laws of nature and don't put all our faith and prayers into an imaginary construct outside of our actual universe. It also highlights the importance of the environment you're in. So especially as a kid, and to use the neuroscience analogy, your environment dictates the path that you set out to crawl in your mental savannah, and especially as a young kid, and also which paths you end up keeping reinforcing. And so the larger takeaway for me is that while you can work hard on yourself through Vipassana meditation, you should also make sure that you're in a healthy environment that pushes you in that same positive direction. Common saying, right? Like it's always easier to swim with than against the current. And even to quote Einstein, I believe in Spinoza's God, who reveals himself in the orderly harmony of what exists, and not in a God which concerns himself with the fates and actions of human beings. So the same as Vipassana, it's really just try to accept what just the core truths are of nature, what you experience yourself, the law of impermanence in this case, and align with that and not some imaginary constructs somewhere in the sky. Then the physics project of Stephen, a little bit different, but so he has also new computational theory of the universe where both general relativity and quantum mechanics are actually emergent. And so his theory is actually also very aligned with the law of impermanence that you observe through your meditation practice. And then last one, number 14, stillness as a story of a barrel. And so the way I look at it is we all have a barrel which keeps filling with water based on all kinds of sensory stimulation that we get. And so as long as it doesn't overflow, we have the ability to act with reason and compassion. The problem is that the moment it overflows and we just basically get too overloaded with stimuli, be it from the outside or just feelings from anger inside, we go into tilt modes and we have much less control over our actions. Put it differently, the it takes over from the super ego. The inner stillness that Vipassana practice, you can imagine as both draining excess water from the barrel and also just like increasing the size of the barrel that you have in general. So in another way, because you have such a bigger and more empty barrel, you're even able to absorb some of the water from people around you and just in general create this like calming and soothing energy in your immediate sphere of influence. Basically helping yourself helps everyone around you too. All right, so this was quite a lot, and as you might have guessed, I am a big fan of the universal, non-secular, and especially experimental nature of Vipassana, and I'm actually really feeling the benefits both in my own body and mind already. However, I do share one major critique point together with Nietzsche. And it's basically to master this technique, one tends to withdraw from the world. You create your own sanctuary, your own dojo, and people use it more as a refuge from all kinds of miseries. But in my opinion, one should actually use these new gained superpowers almost to embrace life. You could basically look at it a little bit as the synthesis of Hermann Hesse's Narcissus and Goldmund. So it's both the Apollonian ascetic ideals and the Dionysian worldly experience. So while being an ascetic monk allows you to fully dig into the meditation with minimal otherworldly temptations, however, if you pay close enough attention in the real world, you will find endless of opportunities to remain equanimous and basically train to not react to those feelings of aversion and craving. Those feelings in the real world just come in many more flavors and are therefore harder to denies. In the end, happiness and inner peace, as a little bit stolen from Into the Wild, are only true when shared, and the sharing you do in the real world.